All right. Check, check. Okay. Looks like sound should be working. Hi, everyone. All right. Today is our last class before reading week. We're going to try and finish off the chapter that we were taking a look at on Monday. Oh, my goodness. Excuse me. So that is, of course, chapter on perception. So we'll continue our discussion of perception. Let me just start sharing my screen. All right. Okay. There we go. Perception part 2. Here is about where we left off with this quote from John Locke, and I'll read this again, just by way of recap. So, it is evident that the mind knows not things immediately, but only by the intervention of the ideas it has of them. Our knowledge, therefore, is real only insofar as there is conformity between our ideas and the reality of things. But what shall be here the criterion? How shall the mind, when it perceives nothing but its own ideas, know they agree with the things themselves? So Locke, you'll recall, is advocating this variant of indirect realism called representative realism. So let's, whoopsie daisy, don't want to go there yet. Um, so just by way of recap, I mean, recall Locke's distinction between primary qualities and secondary qualities. Does anyone want to take a stab at summarizing the difference between those two qualities or ideas of those two kinds of qualities, either in the chat or you can raise your hand and use voice if you want. But the primary and secondary quality distinction, who wants to take a stab at expanding on that? Yeah, primary qualities are in the object. That's right. So we're talking things like extension or solidity. Yeah, secondary qualities, secondary qualities are um, things that happen because of interactions between what's out there in the world and our sensory systems, right? So primary qualities are in the objects, and our ideas of primary qualities resemble the objects, or resemble those qualities in the object. And this is not the case with secondary qualities. So a secondary quality would be something like color or pitch. These do not resemble the qualities of the object. And they're produced as a result of um, our senses, really. So solidity, I mean, our idea of this primary quality resembles actual solidity. Um, but say color, which is a secondary quality, doesn't resemble the object. Um, you think of it this way, like imagine looking at a red apple, right? That apple selectively reflects only those particular wavelengths of light that show up as red to us when we look at the apple. Um, so that's the distinction. So Locke has kind of left himself with a question. What justifies this distinction? And do either kinds of qualities really give us knowledge about the things that they're meant to represent? Not really, Sam. It's not really meant to work that way. Um, it's about um, fundamental properties, not not necessarily what you're calling social qualities. Um, I can see the analogy that you're attempting to draw, but these ideas aren't really meant to be employed that way. Do you know what I mean? Um, which is not to say that people can have ideas about people which do not resemble the people themselves. That's certainly true. Like that can definitely happen, right? Um, but Locke is talking about objects, like objects in the world. Um, so do either primary or secondary qualities actually give us any knowledge about the things that they're supposed to represent? Uh, remember, remember, this is representative realism. So the idea is that our mental representations are supposed to represent the world um, the way the world really is in some important sense. Sure, when it comes to secondary qualities, those qualities don't resemble the qualities of the object, but they should still represent the world in a way that allows us to get around in the world, right? I mean, if I have a blue philosophy book on my desk, sure, blue is a secondary quality, but I can still interact with the book. I can look at the book, I can see where it is, I can pick it up and start reading it, right? But but there's an assumption there, right? We don't since we don't directly perceive the world, um, then how do we know what we do perceive, our own sensations, are actually telling us what the world is really like? That's the problem. And Locke thought that he could address this problem, right? He did so by pointing out that our ideas of primary and sensory, primary and secondary qualities are contravolitional. They occur to us whether we want them to or not. Um, you don't have to try to, um, perceive the color green, right? Green objects just appear green to you. Um, because of the properties that the properties of green objects cause green experiences in us, right? Um, so the idea that these ideas are contravolitional suggests that there's something out there in the world causing them. They're not caused by our own minds, Locke would say. So the problems seem to stick around though, because after all, we don't experience the causes of our own ideas directly, only indirectly. We only experience the ideas themselves. Do you see what I mean? So the problem is, how do we justify claims that we are even indirectly perceiving objects in the world at all? Think about it like this, right? I say I see a red apple. And like, how do you know there's a red apple there? After all, if you only perceive your own ideas, well, sure, you can say with certainty that you're perceiving your idea of the apple or your sensation of the apple. But how do you know there's really an apple out there if all you can directly perceive are your own sensations? It's a skeptical problem, right? It's another one of the skeptic's questions. And we have to try and address it. Maybe science can help us do that. Here, let me get myself out of the way here. Maybe we can justify the claim that objects in the world exist via inference. We can infer from our sensations and also from whatever theoretical framework we have that explains those sensations that objects in the world really do exist and really do have certain properties. This would be like justification in the scientific sense, right? Scientists infer all kinds of things that they can't directly observe, but which are predicted by their theoretical frameworks. So, can you think of some examples? There are lots of things that we don't directly observe, but we infer the existence of. So try and come up with some natural phenomena that are like that. And I've got a clue right here in this picture that ought to get you started. Sound waves, dark matter, quark theory, gravity, love. Yeah, these are all pretty good. Yeah, yeah, like okay, the dinosaurs is fun. Yeah, like I mean, nobody's ever seen a dinosaur. I mean, not a non-avian dinosaur anyway. You know, when I was young, scientific consensus was that birds evolved from dinosaurs, which is true. But now the scientific consensus is just that birds are dinosaurs, right? Avian dinosaurs. Uh, the non-avian dinosaurs all went extinct. But those that remain evolved into birds. But birds are still so similar to dinosaurs that biologists, paleontologists now simply call them dinosaurs. So let's talk about non-avian dinosaurs. Yes, no one's directly observed one, but we've observed their remains, right? Their fossilized bones. So and we have a theoretical framework. Well, bones mean some kind of living creature. So we infer the existence of dinosaurs based upon the fossil evidence, right? Um, well, social constructs are a bit different. I mean, yes, you could. I mean, social sciences would be what you want to do there, right? That's what the social sciences are for. I'll come back to this one. But yeah, black holes, that's another great example. You know, we can't directly observe black holes because they're black holes, but we can infer that they exist because of their effects, namely, as Shanacia said here, because of their gravitational effects. Um, dark matter is also a really good example. Same thing, dark matter, we can't see it, but we can infer that it exists because it has an effect on other things. So this is great. You guys are coming up with lots of examples. The atomic model here, you know, is another good one. You know, nobody sees an electron, but our theories predict that these things exist, right? Dragons, we don't really, I don't think that there are dragons. But solar radiation, yeah, I mean, again, we can't directly see radiation outside of the visual spectrum. But we can also come up with tools that can detect it, right? So that's another way that we can. It's not strictly speaking an inference, but the existence of spirits and ghosts, I think, are probably that's an inference, but I don't really think it's a particularly good one. Um, uh, what else? There was one other thing that I was going to mention. Um, oh, right. I wanted to come back to social constructs. Well, social constructs are, just because something is a social construction doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? Um, arguably, like I think this came up in the New Directions lecture, but something like currency, right? Like that's a social construct. And it definitely exists, right? Our laws are socially constructed, and they definitely exist. Gender roles are social constructs, but they exist. I mean, um, just because it's something is socially constructed, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just it comes about via um, people, right? That's what it means. I haven't read *Sapiens*. No, I'm not sure that I want to be honest. Maybe I've heard. Yeah, I don't know. I've read some reviews that are less than favorable. Um, so maybe I'll read it one day. The problem with popular books like that is that sometimes the authors go way outside of their areas of expertise. Um, I'm worried that that might be the case with that book. But I suppose I should read it to make that determination for myself. It's not to say that it's bad. I haven't read it. I don't know what it's like. Um, so maybe this is just a roundabout way of saying that maybe science can help us here. Um, in a sense, all of us are kind of like scientists, if you think about it. Yeah, Christian, yeah, that's really good. I'm really glad you made that connection. This is exactly what we're worried about here, right? If perception works a certain kind of way, that has implications for whether we know things, right? If I don't perceive things in the world, if I only perceive my ideas, right, like this coffee cup on indirect realism, this is a mental representation. Okay, great. How do I know? Because I'm not directly perceiving it. How do I know what's really out there, right? Am I justified in believing that I'm holding a coffee cup in my hand? A skeptic would say you're not, because you're not directly perceiving a coffee cup. This is just a representation. This could be anything. An evil genius could be making me think this is a coffee cup, but actually it's a banana, right? That's the worry, right? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's why Crumley starts with skepticism. You might be wondering, like, okay, why do we want it? This class is mind, world, and knowledge. So why are we starting with skepticism? Nowadays, skepticism um, means to doubt. So if we want to know things, why are we starting with doubt? Well, by doubting, we can establish what is certain and what is not. And if we can doubt, we want certainty, we want knowledge. But if there's a possibility that I could be mistaken about what I have here, whether it's a coffee cup or a banana or a rock, well, I don't have certainty then, right? And that's what we want. We want certainty. So that's a problem with representative realism that Locke thought he dealt with. Not everybody accepts his justification, though. Like, sure, the world is regular. Actually, I'll just go back. The world is uh, uh, well, the ideas are contra-volitional, and it seems like um, our sensations must be caused by something out there because they don't originate within us. And it seems like with science, we're well justified in saying that things like electrons exist, even though we don't directly observe them. Because those theories also make further predictions that we can observe. For example, in this room in my office, I have my lights on. So these are fluorescent lights. So nobody observes an electron, but the quantum theory behind electrons and how they work explains how these lights work. These lights are filled with gas, right? And when an electrical current is passed through that gas, the energy excites the electrons and they actually jump up. So electrons orbit the nucleus of an atom at various distances, and they'll jump up and down when they receive energy or release some energy. So these electrons are jumping up and down. We actually call that a quantum leap. So they're jumping up and down. And when they do that, they release a photon, a little particle of light. And that's how these lights work. So, do electrons exist? Yeah, in an important sense, they do. Like in an important sense, they're theoretical objects. But in another sense, it's like, well, if they don't exist, then how do these lights work? Is it gremlins? No, it's probably electrons. Yeah. Oh yeah, we're definitely thoroughly into epistemology still. We're going to be doing epistemology throughout the entire class, right? It's just now we're starting to bring in a little bit more about the mind and how the mind works. I guess perception, if you want to think about it this way, is one of the ways things get in to the mind. So, representative realism runs into some skeptical worries. But on the other hand, naive realism doesn't seem to explain how things work. So, on naive realism, if I see a red apple and I go, "Oh, look, there's a red apple." When I say red apple, it's like redness is in the apple or a part of the apple, but it can't be that way, right? Our experience, our naive common sense experience misleads us. But when we try to remedy these problems with representative realism, that's when we run into the skeptical worries. So maybe there's another alternative. Maybe we can explore phenomenalism. Phenomenalism comes from the word phenomenon or phenomena, and this means appearance or appearances. If you read, I highly encourage everybody to check this out, but if you read The Allegory of the Cave by Plato, which you can find in his book, The Republic. It tells the story of a philosopher in a cave, and he sees shadows on the cave wall that are cast by these, puppets that are being carried back and forth in front of a fire. And the light from the fire casts these shadows on the wall. And our person in the cave, who's chained down there in the cave, mistakes these mere appearances, these phenomena, for reality. So that's what that means, just mere appearance. On phenomenalism, the objects of our perception are just ideas. So it's like representative realism in that way. Um, but that's all there is to it. At least on the strong version, on factual phenomenalism. This is a way to save our direct awareness of objects, right? The objects of our perception um, are just our ideas, our sensations. And depending on which variant of phenomenalism you go with, either there are no mind independent objects out there in the world, there is no out there in the world, actually. Um, or if you're a linguistic phenomenalist, you argue that our ways of referring to objects out there in the world are actually shorthand for referring to our sense data, right? So factual phenomenalists would say that this coffee cup, there's no coffee cup out there. It's just this sensation. Doesn't make any sense to talk about this coffee cup having a mind independent experience. If there were no minds around to perceive this coffee cup, it wouldn't exist. Sometimes this is discussed as a variant of idealism. Because remember, realism in philosophy generally means uh, that things exist independently of a mind. You don't need a mind around perceiving it for the thing to exist. And idealism says that things are mind dependent. So realism, mind independent, idealism, mind dependent. Um, question in the chat. Um, I'm not sure what you mean, Christian. Sense data is this knowledge without word. Um, I'm not, can you clarify that? I'm not really sure what you're asking me. Um, if there are no mind independent objects, what's causing the sense data? Good question. We'll get there. It's probably God if you're a factual phenomenalist. Um, so yeah, I'll come, Christian. I'll come back to linguistic phenomenalism. Um, it's like saying that okay, there's linguistic phenomenalists would say that yeah, there are objects that exist out there in the world. It's just that when we refer to objects in the world, that's what we think we're doing, but we're actually referring to our ideas of those objects. So when I say this coffee cup in the out there in the world, I'm actually referring to my sensations, my ideas of this coffee cup, not the actual coffee cup, not the thing in itself. That's what linguistic phenomenalism means. Awesome, great. And Milan, I hope I answer your question as we proceed. Like what's causing if there aren't any objects out there, what causes our experience of them? Um, I guess God. Uh, whether you find that satisfactory is up to you. But this comes from the version of factual phenomenalism that we're going to look at here comes from Bishop George Berkeley, who wrote in a treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge, and then later in his dialogues, the dialogues between Hulas and Philinus, he argued for factual phenomenalism, or sometimes what we also call subjective idealism. Another example of linguistic phenomenalism. Yeah. Okay. Um, so this image of Barclay right here. Okay, there he is. He's sitting there. He's got his book, and he's pointing at it. Um, let's say I were standing in front of this painting and I was talking about it, like, oh, look, I'm in the art gallery. Look at this painting. In this painting, he points to the book. Well, on linguistic phenomenalism, uh, I'm not actually referring to the painting out there in the world. The painting exists, yes, but when I say the painting, what I'm actually referring to is my own um, perception of the painting, not the painting itself. So remember the phenomenal noumenal distinction. So our philosopher in Plato's cave sees the shadows on the wall, the mere appearances, the phenomena. But the things in themselves, the things which are casting the shadow, those are the noumena, the things in themselves. So what we're saying on linguistic phenomenalism is that when we talk about objects in the world, we're actually talking about phenomena, not noumena. That's what that means. But of course, Berkeley is a factual phenomenalist, so he's going to deny that there are mind-independent objects. And this is kind of like how he was thinking. You just pick an object. Imagine any object, and then take away the sensible properties one by one. So, oh, excuse me. Ugh. So let's imagine an apple, a red delicious apple, in fact. So what do we have there? Well, when I imagine a red delicious apple, I see a shiny red apple, and it has solidity. It tastes yummy. It's red, obviously. Maybe if I tap it, it'll make an appley sort of noise, right? Take one of those, take all those sensible properties away one at a time. Take the redness away, then take the apple flavor away, take the solidity away, take all of the sensible properties away one by one. What do you have left? Nothing. There's nothing left once you subtract away all the sensible qualities of the apple. Yeah, it would just be empty space. It would just be void, right? I think this is Milan. I think this is how a materialist might respond, right? They would say, "Well, you're just talking about empty space, right?" But Berkeley's not a materialist. Um, that's not to say that I don't agree with your objection here. I mean, I'm quite skeptical of Berkeley's position. Uh, but this is kind of what's motivating his thinking, right? Um, Berkeley thinks that all there is to our objects of perception are their sensible properties. There's nothing else. So phenomenalism, once again, there's two subtypes, right? Um, the one that we're looking at now is factual phenomenalism, which says that really all there is appearance. All there is to objects is their sensible properties. So this coffee cup, there's no coffee cup out there in the world. It's just this sensible object, this idea of a coffee cup that I have. That's what exists. And linguistic phenomenalism says that, sure, there are objects in the world. This coffee cup does exist out there. But when I say something like, this coffee tastes bad, it doesn't, it tastes good. But this coffee tastes bad. What I'm referring to is not the actual coffee, not the thing in itself. What I'm referring to is my sensation of how the coffee tastes and my visual experience of the coffee cup in my hand. Hasn't it been proven scientifically that space exists because of Einstein's works on gravity and space-time? I mean, yeah, in a sense. You know, it like the ironic thing here is that Einstein was actually a big philosophy reader. Um, he was fluent when it came to the works of Spinoza and also the work of Kant. And Kant, if you'll recall, said that space and time were forms of sensible intuition. They were empirically real things in the world, but they were transcendentally ideal things at the same time in the sense that they structure our perception. And it's arguable that this influenced Einstein to some extent. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, is it good to visualize it as two worlds? Yeah, well, not yeah, the phenomenological world and the world of things in themselves, which may or may not be physical. Yeah, in factual phenomenalism, the only world would be the phenomenological one. Yeah, you're right, Alex, that's right. And I would add to the linguistic phenomenalism, sure, the real world exists, but when we use sentences that we think refer to the real world, we actually refer to the phenomenology. we're kind of mistaken about what things refer to, right? Okay, so it's kind of a weird idea, right? Like, are you like it's interesting to try and think about it if you haven't thought about it like this before. Like, what? I mean, what do you mean things don't exist if there's no minds to perceive them? Like, if I leave the room, does my coffee cup cease to exist? Does the whole room pop out of existence because no one's around to observe it? Here's what Berkeley says. It seems no less evident that the various sensations or ideas imprinted on the sense cannot exist otherwise than in a mind perceiving them. The table I write on, I say, exists. That is, I see and feel it. And if I were out of my study, I might perceive it, or that some other spirit actually does perceive it. So the table that Berkeley's writing on exists because he perceives it or someone else perceives it. If there's no one in the room, God perceives everything anyway, so it's fine. So to continue, their essay is percipi. That's Latin. Esse is to be, and percipi is to be perceived. So to be is to be perceived. Nor is it possible that they should have any existence out of the minds of thinking things which perceive them. Well, if you're a factual phenomenalist, there isn't what you think is the physical world is really a world of um, ideas, right? Sensations or ideas imprinted on the sense need minds to perceive them. So it doesn't make sense to talk about the physical world apart from that. And as for linguistic phenomenology, we'll get to the problems with that. Okay, yeah, we'll get there. We're gonna get there. So here's the thing. Berkeley denies indirect perception, right? Like Locke's view, it leads to skepticism. But if Berkeley's right, then we are in direct contact with the objects of perception. But how do we make sense of this idea that the objects don't exist if they're not being perceived? Um, well, Berkeley might say that, Berkeley would say that it's fine if you can't see anything because God is always perceiving everything all of the time, right? Or there's always the potential that someone else could see the table, even though you don't, right? Well, since the objects of perception are just ideas, and all there is are ideas, then perception is direct. So, like, look at it this way. Naive realism says, okay, I've got a red apple. The redness is in the apple. But that can't be right, right? There's nothing about the apple that's red except for its appearance, um, which is probably a result of the way that it selectively reflects certain wavelengths of light and how our sensory systems work. So then you say, okay, so how about we try indirect realism? Like the redness of the apple is how my mind represents the apple. So there's a real apple out there in the world, but the only thing I have direct contact with is this mental representation of it, not the apple itself. But that leads to skeptical worries. So Berkeley comes along and says, well, what if there are no objects out there in the world? There are only ideas. Well, in that case, then we are in direct contact with the objects of perception. because those mental representations are the real things. That's all there is. So that's why it's direct. Do you see what I mean? Do you see how that works? Awesome. All right. So, but there's some skeptical worries here too, right? I mean, if everything is just in the mind, then what's the difference between waking perception and dreaming, for example? I mean, Berkeley would say it's probably the stability and orderliness of waking experiences that distinguish them from dream experiences. And again, reality, or oh, I have to use air quotes here. Uh, the objects of perception are regular, um, they're stable, the world is ordered, because as I've mentioned, for Berkeley, God exists and he perceives everything all the time. So I guess one thing I should have mentioned is that Berkeley was a bishop. Um, So God is kind of like the guarantor of reality, except reality isn't real, it's ideal. So God is the guarantor of all of this. And he's also the author of all cause and effect relations. Um, Berkeley doesn't think of cause and effect like we're used to thinking about it, right? Say I put my hand in the fire and I burned myself. Well, we would say that the fire caused the burn, which caused pain. But Berkeley would say, no, the fire is just a sign of the effect, the burn and the pain. And both of these are caused by, uh, not caused, but authored by God. So God kind of takes care of everything on Berkeley's factual phenomenalism. But what if you don't believe in God, right? Or maybe there is no God. Maybe it's not a question of belief. Maybe there just is no God. How would factual phenomenalism work if there were no God? There'd be nobody, because God is supposed to be omniscient, and omnipresent, right? He's supposed to be all knowing and everywhere. So if there's no God, then how does factual phenomenalism work? Well, Berkeley actually asked a similar question. Um, think of a sentence like the Earth rotates. So that sentence, was held to be true in Berkeley's day, right? Nobody had observed it directly, right? Because we hadn't invented space travel yet. Um, but we inferred that the Earth rotated just based upon the motions of the sun, moon, and the stars. Um, but how do we know if we can't observe directly? Well, in principle, if we could get somebody up there high enough, they could observe the rotation of the Earth. So we can always replace God with the possibility in principle of there being a human observer instead. That's one kind of answer um, that we get for the atheists and the agnostics, right? I mean, similarly, like philosophers around this time talk a lot about God, but it's not necessarily the God that you get in the Old Testament or the New Testament or the Quran or any pick your religious text. It's not really a theistic God, who performs miracles and intervenes in the universe. It's a deistic God. So a God who kind of creates the universe, sets all the rules in place, all the rules for reality, laws of physics and uh, laws of morality as well. And then just kind of leaves everything alone. That's the God of the philosophers. So A theistic God is like a personal God, can intervene in the universe, so perform miracles and stuff. But the God of the philosophers is this clockwork universe maker. He makes the universe, sets it in motion, and doesn't interfere. But he's given us certain things: reason, morality, free will, and lets us do with that what we will. And reason is described like a light, because think about it, your reason illuminates things for you, right? It's the natural light of reason. No, there are no objects in themselves on this view. But you're right, it does mean that the object of perception, the table, would exist if in principle somebody could observe it. Yeah. But then there might be an infinite regress here. So, okay, maybe in principle, we could send someone up to the heavens, and they could observe the earth rotating. But how do we know the heavens exist? No one's there to directly perceive them either. And so it goes, an infinite regress of places that people could potentially go and observe things and perceive things, but we don't know that those places exist until someone is there and observing them. And we just kind of spiral downward into this infinite regress, right? So yeah, I don't know. What do we think about what do we think about factual phenomenalism? I mean, how comfortable are we with the suggestion that there aren't any objects in the external world? There are only objects of perception, and things are only real to the extent that they are perceived. I mean, does that strike any of you as odd? Or are maybe some of you into it? Um, not exactly like Plato's theory of forms, but Plato confusingly is sometimes called an idealist and sometimes a realist, right? The forms or ideas are what are really real for Plato. They're the most real things. So because of his emphasis on ideas, he's sometimes called an idealist. But then again, these ideas exist independently of the mind. So they're also real. So also sometimes we call this Platonic realism. So it's kind of confusing. I think realism is probably the better term because the forms are supposed to exist independently of the mind. Um, in that sense, it's quite different from what Berkeley says. But I'll still maintain, like Plato's cave, the allegory of the cave can help us make sense of the distinction between phenomena and noumena, between appearances and things in themselves. Yeah. How do we know God exists, right? Like who senses God? I mean, Berkeley would say, yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, Berkeley would be making an inference there, right? He would probably say, well, God must exist because all of this stuff is continuing to exist. My desk is still there when I leave the room and come back. But then he'd be begging the question, right? That would be a circular argument. Yeah, retroactive, like making an explanation up, kind of like ad hoc. We'd say ad hoc, like made up out of whole cloth. And Christian says it's too open of a definition for God. Well, because remember, this is, I mean, you could be right. I mean, I don't know what people's personal beliefs are here, but I know that, if you're coming from a religious background, you're probably more used to thinking about like a theistic God, like a personal God. Um, and Barclay's not really doing that. Barclay's using a different conception of God. Um, but you're right. When you say it's too open of a definition, this god of the philosophers just kind of does whatever we need him to. um you know, and I'm not trying to be facetious here, but it's like, hey, do you need your objects of perception to continue to exist even though you're not perceiving them? Well, God does it. You know, God is just the answer to the question that we don't have a different answer for yet. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, I'd say, yeah, you're definitely not wrong with that insight. Um, Sometimes this is called the God of the gaps argument, right? We have a gap in our knowledge, so we explain it by saying God did it, right? But it doesn't have to be God. It could be something else like demons, you know, mental illness. Before we knew what that was, we would say, "Oh, it's demons," right? And even we would even sometimes drill holes in heads to let the demons out. It was called trepanning. Yeah, yeah. Oh my, indeed. Yeah, yeah. God is the when I say yeah, like when I say God is the guarantor of um our perception of everything. It's like he does all that work for Barclay. Um, yeah, and you know, you don't have to buy it, right? Even if you believe in God, a lot of people believe in God, yet they also believe in mind independent objects, right? So, like, you can believe in God and also believe that there's a real coffee cup that exists out in the world somewhere, right? They're not incompatible. So, but Barclay is really kind of doing his own thing with his subjective idealism, with this factual phenomenalism. He's trying again. The reason why he's doing this is because he sees skeptical worries with indirect realism. By removing the external world, he's putting us in direct contact with our objects of perception and alleviating those skeptical worries. But as we've seen, you know, we can still ask questions of Berkeley that I don't think he could answer very well. Like, how do you know God exists? Well, if you say, well, but look, everything continues to exist. Well, okay, but you're begging the question now, right? Just like Descartes. You know, I have a clear and distinct idea of God. I can trust my clear and distinct ideas because, you know, God wouldn't deceive me. It's a circle. Same thing here, right? Philosophers are not immune from making logical fallacies. That's an important lesson here. So we've got about 20 or 25 minutes left, but we're really working our way through here. Let's see if we can cover linguistic phenomenalism. Hopefully, I can answer some of the questions that you all had. So again, the idea here is that when we refer to objects in the world, sure, those objects exist. There are mind-independent objects out there that really exist. But when we talk about them, we're actually referring to our sensations of those objects, not the objects themselves. So sentences like the coffee cup in my hand do not refer to a real coffee cup in my hand, even though there is a real coffee cup out there. What it refers to is my sensation of the coffee cup in my hand. Ooh, I'm getting my battery warning on my laptop, so I'm just going to plug myself in real quick. Yeah. So, um, so you can think of it as a kind of shorthand. I think is the way that Crumley puts it. So there are things that exist out there in the world, but when I think I'm talking about what those things, I'm actually talking about my sensations, my perceptions, my sense data. The motivation for this is the notion of reduction in the sciences, right? This is the idea that we can reduce something complicated to something simple, or that we can reduce one higher level process to a lower level process. So, in one sense, science is reductionist in that I could reduce biology to chemistry. So, if I want to talk about how a cell works, I can do it with concepts and so forth from biology, but I can also reduce all of those important concepts to chemistry. And I can further reduce chemistry to physics, right? So that's reduction. Similarly, I have this notion of heat. What is heat? Well, it's the transfer of energy via the mean kinetic energy of molecules, right? So I can reduce the concept of heat to something more fundamental, right? And that's the idea here, is that when I'm talking about things that are in the world, or when I think I'm talking about those things, what I'm actually doing is referring to my sensations, not to the things themselves. Yeah, you could even just reduce physics to math. That's right. So you see how reduction works, right? That's the inspiration here. Now, how is all of this actually supposed to work, right? Because we don't really have a procedure for translating talk of physical objects into talk of sensations, or vice versa. I mean, let's try and come up with an example. So, come up with an object, any object, and we'll try to generate a sentence about that object that we can translate into a sentence about sensations. Let's give it a try. I'll give you a second to think of an example. We can't use coffee cup because I've been using that all morning. There is actually one in the textbook, an example that is. I guess I could have put this on the slide. I'll give you one more little bit of time to try and come up with an example of a sentence that you think refers to a real object, but that we could reduce to talk of sensations. And if you're really stuck and you have your textbook with you, then I invite you to turn to page 135 and have a look at the second paragraph. Yeah. Okay, so apples. So let's say, yeah, Daisy. Yeah, you're right. I am standing on the ground. Apples taste sweet. Okay, so let's make it even simpler. Let's combine Becky and Alex's. Daisy's, yours is really good. Yeah, you get the idea. When you say your shirt is yellow, you're talking about the sensation of the cloth, the color perception, not the actual shirt. You're right. You've got the right idea. I'm going to take Becky's and Alex's example and combine them. So there is an apple on the ground, or, anything like that. There is an apple on the ground. How can we translate it into sensations talk? We might say, oh, well, the apple is somewhat spherical and it's red or perhaps green. Um, but is that all there is to apples? We do lots of things with apples. Sometimes we slice them. Sometimes we turn them into applesauce. Right? And obviously, with these things that we can do with apples comes lots of different sensations. You could step on that apple and feel it squish under your foot, right? Let's compare that to the example in the textbook. Um, this is again from page 135. Imagine, here's a banana. What sequence of sensations are to be associated with it? Oh, of course, the obvious ones, like yellow and slightly curved. This cannot be all, however. We sometimes mash bananas, split them and make banana splits out of them, slip on them. Andrea might even be exasperated with Andrew and bash him with a banana. So, just what are the sensations that are to be associated with banana? Um, we could go on and on and on, right? Um, it seems um, it seems challenging to say the least to specify how exactly our talk of objects in the world actually refers to sensations, right? Because if I say there's a banana or there's an apple, what am I talking about? Am I talking about the shape of the fruit? What am I really referring to? Is it the shape and the color of the fruit? Is it, like how do I know, how do I understand that a sliced apple and an apple on the ground, or a mashed banana and a banana that's just sitting there, are the same? If what I'm actually referring to are just sensations, right? Yeah. But if we're inspired by reductionism, doesn't it make more sense to just say apple, right? Rather than spherical object growing on a tree and so forth, right? It's kind of like almost like the linguistic phenomenalists are going the wrong way. They're not actually reducing anything. They're making things more complicated, right? And also, even if we grant that they're correct, since sentences that describe sensations don't necessarily imply that the physical objects actually exist, right? Because we can have hallucinations. I could have a sensation of a banana, but maybe I'm dreaming. Maybe I'm hallucinating. Maybe I ate that apple off the ground, right? And there was something on it, some contaminant of some kind that caused me to hallucinate a banana. Um, I have my sensation, and I can talk about that. I can talk about my sensations. I can say, "Hey, here's a banana," but that doesn't guarantee that there's a banana out there in the world. My friends could say, "What banana? Josh, are you hallucinating? Did you eat something off the ground that you shouldn't have?" Right? It does not imply that there's an actual banana out there. So that's another problem. Maybe we can revisit direct realism. Some thinkers attempted to do so in the 20th century. Um, one way to do this, and we're almost finished, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, we are almost finished. One attempt of doing this is called adverbial theory. Just by way of recall from English class, what the heck is an adverb? Does anyone remember? I'll let you I'll let you tell me in the chat. Adverbs, adverbs. Yeah, describes a verb. Yeah, like an adjective for verbs. Yeah, the true questions. Well, a lot of philosophy is really about what we mean by what we say. Yeah. Yeah, it's something that describes verbs or other adverbs. You'll get the idea why this is called adverbial theory. The idea behind adverbial theory is that we perceive objects by experiencing them in certain ways. So, um, our sensations on adverbial theory are not really objects of awareness, so it's not like I have this coffee cup here and I have this experience of the coffee cup, and that experience or sensation is the object of which I am aware. right? On this view, it's not sense data that we're immediately aware of, but our sensations are ways of being aware of physical objects. So, it surprised me somewhat that Crumley doesn't mention enactivism in this chapter. I'll spell that out in the chat. Uh, enactivism or enactive perception. I'll just make sure I've spelled those correctly. Yeah, he doesn't refer to this, but this is an idea from Alva Noe and Kevin O'Regan. The idea is that um, perceptions aren't something that happen to us. Perception is something that we do. Perception is active, right? He doesn't mention this, but this reminded me of that. Here's how Crumley describes the adverbial view. He says, philosophers sometimes describe this adverbial view in this way. Julia sees a shirt that is chartreuse. She is thus appeared to chartreusely. Or Sam takes a bite of an apple, and he is appeared to sweetly. Adverbial theory gives us a way of talking about how we sense and the subsequent belief that arises from sensation. And again, sensations are results of ways of perceiving. They're not objects of perception. And perception is direct on this view. It's also a causal theory, so it gives us what we want. If we want to bring direct realism back, it avoids the problems of naive realism. It makes perception direct, and it's causal. So the apple causes me to be appeared to sweetly, if that makes sense, right? I know it's an awfully strange way of using these words, isn't it? Like if I take a sip of this coffee, I am appeared to coffeely. It's not like I have an appearance in the mind and I can think about it like, oh, this coffee cup. Oh, yes, what a nice mental representation. Look, I can, oh, there's a goat on it. Wow, cool. No, that's not what it's like. It's not like it's an object of perception. Rather, perception is a way of coming to be aware that there's a coffee cup here. It's more active. I know this is really weird sounding. Does everyone follow me here? If you don't, please tell me in the chat. All right. No one's speaking up, so I'm going to assume that no one has any questions. But if you do, okay, I can try and elaborate more. Like ways of being appeared to. It's still contravolitional, right? I'm being appeared to, if I take the bite of the apple, I'm being appeared to sweetly. Um, it's just a way, it's sort of shifting the emphasis um from like, oh, there's this object of perception here to the ways in which we become aware of things that are out there in the world. But there's a problem. Adverbial theory doesn't really give us a way to distinguish between certain experiences, right? And there's another example of this in the book, which I'll read to you. So one of the problems here is that um, Yeah, the many property. Here it is. So this is from page 138. I'll just read this to you. Suppose Deirdre sees a blue book and a red ball. In the adverbial account, she is sensing bluely, rectangularly, redly, and roundly. But this would also be the adverbialist description of what is going on when she sees a red book and a blue ball. So if I have a red ball and a blue book, I'm being appeared to in the same way as if I have a blue ball and a red book. Adverbialists would not seem to be able to distinguish between the ways I'm being appeared to in those two different cases. So that's the many property problem. And that's a problem for adverbial theory. Another way of maybe reviving direct realism is the doxastic view. So this comes from the classical Greek doxa, and that means belief or opinion. It's the origin of our word for orthodox, orthodoxy, right? Someone in the chat. Another example of the many property problem. Well, what's common to these kinds of things is that we have two different objects appearing to us. And we can imagine flipping the properties of these objects such that our adverbial description of the way they appear to us is the exact same, even though the objects in our different scenarios are different, right? I'll just yeah, I'm having trouble thinking of other objects. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that Crumley's example is really as simple as it gets. In the one case, I have a red ball and a blue book. Just to go over it again. So I'm being appeared to roundly, redly, rectangularly, and bluely. Um, and if I switch the color of the ball and the book, I'm still being appeared to in the same way, but the objects are different, right? I suppose you could. Um, I suppose you could if you just wanted to list the properties in the order that they're perceived. It's just that the adverbial theory seems to reduce perception down to just the ways in which we are appeared to, and that might be a necessary part of an account of perception, but it's not sufficient for our purposes. What I think Crumley is trying to do here is say, like, look, we need more than just adverbial descriptions, right? And that might include maybe the order we become aware of of these properties, right? Maybe that could be a way to address it. So let's try and finish this last slide real quick. We got 4 minutes. So on the doxastic view, perception is not really about producing sensory experiences, which is kind of strange. Instead, perception is about conveying information. It's how we get mental states with content, how we fix the content of mental states like belief. So Armstrong describes perception as a means of acquiring belief. So it's not about having sensory experiences. We de-emphasize the sensory qualities or the phenomenology of our perceptual experiences, and we emphasize the information conveyance processes which help us to generate beliefs. This is a direct realist view, and it's causal, because information that comes in via the senses causes us to form certain beliefs with certain contents. But there are problems. I mean, there are optical illusions, and our experiences have a a phenomenal quality to them, right? There's something that it's like to have an experience. It's not mere belief forming, right? Like, sure, I've got this philosophy book on my desk, right? So I see the book, information reaches my, my mind, and I form the perceptual belief that there is a philosophy book on my desk. That's the purpose of perception, according to the doxastic view. But the problem is there's more to it than that, which the doxastic view doesn't seem to account for. There's something that it's like to look at this book, right? This book appears different than, say, this book, right? So how do we account for that on the doxastic view? Well, we don't really, and that's a problem. So that's the doxastic view. Any questions about that one? I'll leave it quiet for a sec, just in case anyone has any questions. Oh my goodness. Oh. Mm, mm, mm. All right. No questions then. Good, good. Well, okay. So that's it then. Let's leave it there. So reading week. It's reading week starting next week. So thank you all. I hope you all have a great reading week. Remember that when we get back, we're going to be looking at chapter 6, which is all about universals. Do, 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 yes, Tiana, if you want to stick around, I can help you. Um, just gonna try and have your tests ready, or your grades ready for you sometime over reading week. And I was thinking also what I would do is try and provide some sample essay topic ideas. I'll come up with a list and I'll post it on Brightspace. It'll mostly be stuff that's drawn from, the chapters in our textbook, but I'll come up with 10 or 12 topics, 10 or 12 research questions that you could maybe, go with if you wanted to. And yeah, Tiana, if you want to speak, yeah, you can quote newspaper articles. Newspaper articles are good, especially if you're talking about, events that have happened. Um, Newspaper articles are good. And when it comes to other sources, remember you want to focus on scholarly stuff, right? Okay, so that's it. So Tiana, stick around. I'm just going to stop recording, and then we'll have a quick chat about the essay. For everyone else, enjoy your reading week, and I'll see you when we get back. Bye for now.